It was a cold night in Newark, New Jersey, early December of 2017. The city lights glowed against the glass windows of the Hampton Club, one of those upscale restaurants where folks go to be seen. Emily Dawson stood near the entrance, tugging at her navy blue dress. It was her husband's company's end-of-year dinner. She had spent nearly an hour trying to fit into something that would hide the truth. She weighed 298 pounds. But more than anything, she wanted to look like she belonged. "Stop fidgeting," her husband Mark whispered sharply, placing his hand on the small of her back. "You're drawing attention." Emily looked up at him and smiled weakly. Mark was all charm to everyone else. Tall, polished, always in control. But behind closed doors, he had a sharp tongue and colder eyes. Emily had learned to shrink herself without losing a single pound, emotionally at least. The dinner was loud, full of small talk and clinking glasses. People laughed too loud and drank too much wine. Emily sat quietly next to Mark at the long table near the front. The air smelled of roasted lamb and expensive cologne. She watched the younger women, thin, dressed in high-end brands, hair freshly blown out. She felt invisible, or worse, pitied. At around 8 o'clock, Mark stood to give his speech. He was the regional director, after all. He thanked his team, praised the numbers, spoke about success, money, growth, values, and how they'd built something strong together. Then came the moment no one expected. "And lastly," Mark said, raising his glass, "we've got a change in operations coming. We're saying goodbye to our admin coordinator, my wife, Emily, and welcoming someone fresh, someone with more energy for the role." Emily's stomach dropped. "Please welcome Amanda Keene, who will be taking over Emily's position starting January 2nd. There was a pause, the kind of silence that hurts. Then light applause. Amanda stood up from the other end of the table, young, blonde, thin, smiling like she'd won the lottery. She walked around the table, leaned in, and kissed Mark on the cheek. Emily sat frozen, her face burned, her throat closed, and all she could hear was the pounding in her ears. He had fired her, publicly, in front of colleagues, strangers, and worse, friends. Later in the car, she stared out the window, arms crossed over her stomach. "You could have told me in private," she said quietly. Mark didn't even glance at her. "It's just business, Emily. You haven't kept up. Amanda's sharp, motivated. The position needs someone with drive, health, appearance. You've let yourself go." Emily bit her lip. Hard. He had said those words before. But this time, they cut deeper. That night, alone in their bedroom, Emily lay on the edge of the bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slowly above her. Everything felt heavy, her body, her chest, her heart. But beneath the weight, something cracked, something shifted. She thought of all the years she gave to him, the late nights she waited up, the events she skipped because nothing fit, the loyalty, the way she tried to make their home feel safe. And this was her reward? No, this was not going to be her story, not the ending. Somewhere between 1 a.m. and 2, Emily got out of bed, walked to the bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. "You're not done," she whispered. "You're not over." She weighed 298 pounds. She was broken, and humiliated. But for the first time in years, she didn't feel small. She felt something else. A spark. And that spark would become the fire that changed everything. The morning after the dinner felt like waking up from a storm. Outside, the Newark sky was gray and heavy, and inside the Dawson house, silence clung to the walls like smoke. Emily stood in the kitchen, staring at the coffee maker, not even sure why she turned it on. The scent of bitter roast filled the air, but nothing felt warm anymore. She sat at the small table by the window, her robe tied loosely, a notebook in front of her. The same notebook where she used to write down grocery lists and appointments. But today, she was writing something different. She wrote one sentence at the top of the page. "No one humiliates me twice." She didn't know what the plan was. Not yet. But she knew one thing. She couldn't stay the same. Not for Mark, not for revenge, for herself, for her health, her peace, and her worth. Around 9:30, she got a call from her cousin Jackie. They hadn't spoken in months. "I heard what happened," Jackie said softly. "At the dinner." Emily's stomach twisted. "Yeah, guess news travels fast." "You okay?" Emily stared out at the leafless trees, shaking in the cold wind. "Not really, but I will be." There was a pause. "Listen," Jackie continued. "I know this is random, but remember that gym I work at? You can come by. No cost, just show up." Emily almost laughed. The gym? Her? At almost 300 pounds? But Jackie didn't sound like she was offering pity. She sounded like someone who had nothing to gain, just someone who believed in second chances. That afternoon, Emily stood in front of the full-length mirror in her bedroom. She studied the way her robe clung to her stomach, how her chin folded when she tilted her head. Her hands ran down her sides, over the rolls she used to pretend weren't there. "This is the truth," she whispered. "This is what it is." And then, slowly, she took out an old pair of sneakers from under the bed. Still had dust on them from that one time she tried Zumba 4 years ago. She drove to Jackie's gym that evening, just after 6. The building was nothing fancy. Red bricks, a blinking neon sign that said Power Core Fitness. Inside, the walls smelled like rubber mats and ambition. People in leggings and tank tops moved between treadmills and weight racks. She felt like an alien. Jackie met her near the front desk. "Em, you made it." Emily nodded, lips tight. "Barely." They started small. 10 minutes on the bike, 5 on the rowing machine, a few squats using just her body weight. Her face turned red, her breath came hard and fast. But Jackie never judged, never rushed, just kept saying, "You're stronger than you think." When Emily got home, she collapsed onto the couch. Her legs were shaking, her back ached. But there was something new inside her, something steady and strange. That night, she opened her laptop and started reading. Nutrition, metabolism, how the body stores fat, how values aren't tied to size, how prosperity starts with choosing yourself. She cleaned out the fridge, tossed the frozen pizzas, the sugary cereal, the soda cans. It hurt to waste money, but she knew the cost of staying the same was far greater. Over the next few days, the routine stuck. Early morning walks, homemade meals, one day at a time. She even started writing goals on her mirror with a dry erase marker. 10 pounds down. Run for 5 minutes straight. Cook 3 healthy meals this week. Choose health. Choose life. And Mark? He barely noticed. He stayed later at work. Came home smelling like cologne that wasn't hers. He didn't ask where she went or why she started drinking green smoothies instead of coffee. But Emily didn't care. For once, she wasn't doing this for his attention. This was for her future, for the wealth of self-respect she hadn't felt in years. By the end of December, Emily stepped on the scale and saw the number. 286 pounds. 12 pounds gone. It wasn't just about the number. It was about the power she felt, the control, the realization that she could change if she stayed consistent, that her life didn't have to be defined by one cruel night at a fancy restaurant. That small spark from the bathroom mirror had become a slow, steady fire. She wasn't waiting to be rescued. She was rebuilding. Piece by piece, By the second week of January, Newark was wrapped in snow. Streets were slushy, breath turned to clouds, and folks walked fast with their collars up and heads down. But Emily Dawson was moving differently now. Slowly, deliberately. Her steps no longer dragged. She had purpose. Each morning, before the sun rose, she bundled up and walked around her block. It wasn't far, maybe 10 minutes in total. But it was hers, her time, her fight, her reclaiming of the woman she'd buried under years of shame, silence, and self-doubt. Back at the house, Mark barely spoke. He left early, came home late. The gap between them had turned into a canyon. But Emily didn't chase him. Not anymore. Something inside her had shifted. She had stopped begging to be seen. At the gym, Jackie kept her accountable. "We're not doing this for a beach body," Jackie said one night, adjusting Emily's squat form. "We're doing this for your heart, for your back, for your energy, for your health." Emily nodded, drenched in sweat, chest heaving. "And for my soul." She wasn't just burning calories. She was burning pain, anger, and the memory of Mark's voice echoing in her head. "You've let yourself go." She started meal prepping on Sundays. Baked chicken, quinoa, roasted vegetables. She read labels at the grocery store and paid attention to ingredients. At first it felt strange spending that much money on produce and lean protein instead of microwave dinners. But soon, she understood that this was the cost of prosperity. Real prosperity. The kind that started on the inside. One evening, around 6:30, Emily sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings on her laptop. Mark walked in, loosened his tie, and raised an eyebrow. "You looking for jobs now?" She didn't flinch. "Yeah. I'm not going to sit around waiting to be replaced in every part of my life." He scoffed. "You don't exactly have options, Em." But she did. She was building them, every drop of sweat, every pound lost, every chapter she read on wealth, values, and self-reliance. It was all stacking up into something stronger than his words. By February 1st, Emily had dropped 18 pounds in total. The scale read 280 pounds. She stared at the number, then at her reflection. She didn't look drastically different, but her eyes were clearer. Her skin was brighter. Her back stood straighter. She wasn't trying to disappear anymore. She was trying to live. That weekend, Jackie invited her to a women's wellness event in Jersey City. Emily almost said no. She didn't think she belonged in rooms like that. But something in her whispered, "Go." Inside the venue, the air buzzed with life. Women of all shapes, sizes, and backgrounds stood together, sharing their stories, sipping on green tea, laughing without apology. There were booths about financial health, mental health, physical wellness, and empowerment through prosperity. Emily walked through each aisle slowly, absorbing every word. At one station, a speaker talked about self-worth not being tied to marriage. At another, a young entrepreneur spoke about building wealth from scratch. It was like the universe was holding up a mirror and saying, "This is what's possible." That night, on the ride home, Emily sat in the passenger seat of Jackie's car, quiet. "You good?" Jackie asked. Emily nodded, eyes on the city lights. "I've been playing small for too long." The next morning, Sunday, February 4th, Emily stood in her living room, notebook in hand. She flipped past her old pages, the goals, the angry scribbles, and wrote something new. "I will rise in health, wealth, and power, and I will never again hand over my worth to someone else." The pen trembled in her hand, not from fear, from strength. And that strength was no longer just a spark, it was a fire no one could put out. By the second week of February, Newark was starting to thaw. The snowbanks had turned to slush, and the sidewalks were lined with salt stains and muddy puddles. Life, like the weather, was slowly shifting. Emily Dawson stood in front of her closet one quiet Thursday morning, around 7:45. The usual routine would have had her grabbing something oversized and black, the kind of outfit that blended into the background. But not today. She reached for a burgundy sweater, one that hugged her waist instead of hiding it, paired with dark jeans that had gathered dust for years. They fit. Snug, but they fit. Downstairs, Mark was pouring coffee, scrolling through his phone like she didn't exist. The silence between them had become normal. But Emily was no longer afraid of silence. "I'm heading out," she said, grabbing her keys. He looked up briefly. "Since when do you leave before me?" She smiled faintly. "Since I realized staying here won't build the life I want." He blinked, confused. "Where are you even going?" Emily opened the front door and looked back over her shoulder. "To reclaim my life and my values." She didn't wait for his reply. That morning, Emily met with a woman named Denise. They had connected at the wellness event. Denise ran a local nonprofit helping women re-enter the workforce after trauma, divorce, or long absences. "I remember you," Denise said with a warm smile. "You spoke like someone who's ready for real change." Emily nodded. "I'm not looking for just a paycheck. I want to do work that aligns with who I am now, work with purpose. That builds prosperity in more than just a bank account." Denise leaned forward. "That mindset? That's your wealth. That's the difference." She offered Emily a part-time position assisting with digital organization and client outreach. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't pay much. But it was something. And it came with dignity. By early March, Emily had lost 31 pounds. She weighed 267 pounds. Her skin glowed, her energy was different, and people noticed. Not just her body, her presence. She walked into PowerCore like she owned the place. People greeted her, smiled at her, not out of pity, but respect. One evening, around 6:15, as she left the gym, she saw Mark's car parked across the street. He rolled the window down. "You avoiding me now?" Emily crossed her arms. "I've just been busy, living." Mark looked at her, really looked at her. "You look different." "I am." A silence fell between them, awkward and thick. "I've been thinking," he said slowly. "Maybe we got off track. Maybe we should talk." Emily tilted her head. "Talk about what?" "You replaced me at your job. You checked out of this marriage long before that dinner. I just finally stopped begging to be seen." He looked down, then back up. "You're not going to throw away what we built, are you?" She chuckled. "Mark, we didn't build anything. I built around you, around your moods, your needs. I shrunk myself emotionally while growing physically, but not anymore." "You're not the same woman I married," he said, like it was an insult. Emily smiled. "Thank God." Later that night, Emily packed a small overnight bag. She wasn't leaving for good, not yet, but she needed space, clarity, peace. She went to Jackie's place. They ordered grilled salmon and brown rice, lit candles, and talked like sisters. "You're glowing," Jackie said, passing her a cup of chamomile tea. Emily exhaled. "I feel rich, Jack. Not with money, but with self-worth, with values, with health, with options." Jackie raised her mug. "To new beginnings." Emily raised hers. "And to not letting anyone decide your worth." That night, lying on a couch that wasn't hers but felt more like home than her own bed, Emily realized she had already begun the most powerful journey of her life, the one back to herself. She wasn't just losing pounds. She was gaining everything that mattered. March in Newark was a stubborn mix of wind and rain. Cold enough to bite your bones in the morning, But by mid-afternoon, patches of sunlight would sneak between the clouds. Emily Dawson welcomed the unpredictability. It mirrored her own transformation, messy, slow, but unstoppable. By the third week of March, Emily weighed 249 pounds. She had lost nearly 50 pounds since that humiliating night back in December. And it showed, not just in the way her jeans fit, but in how she carried herself. Head up, shoulders back, like someone who no longer apologized for taking up space. She had also picked up extra hours at the nonprofit, helping organize community workshops around financial literacy and women's empowerment. It was there she started learning more about personal finance, credit, savings, long-term planning. Money ain't just about surviving, Denise said during one of their coffee breaks. It's about building your own kind of freedom. Emily soaked it all in. Budgeting apps, compound interest, emergency funds. For the first time in her life, money didn't feel like a source of shame. It felt like a tool for her prosperity. On a rainy Friday, around 5 o'clock, Emily walked into a small local boutique to buy herself something that wasn't oversized or bought out of desperation. The shop was cozy, tucked between a bakery and a flower shop near downtown. The walls were soft beige, and the air smelled like lavender and cedar wood. She tried on a fitted dark green dress, knee-length, soft fabric, long sleeves. It hugged her curves in a way that made her smile, not flinch. As she stepped out of the fitting room, the saleswoman gasped softly. "Wow," she said, hand over her chest. "That color looks made for you." Emily laughed, embarrassed. "I haven't worn anything this real in years." "Well," the woman replied, "you look like someone stepping into her power." She bought the dress. That weekend, Jackie convinced her to join a brunch with some old friends. Emily hesitated at first, worried about awkward looks, forced small talk, or worse, pity. But she showed up. And when she walked in, the room got quiet. Not in a bad way, in the what happened to her kind of way. "Emily," one of the girls whispered, "Oh my God, you look incredible." But Emily didn't need their validation. She appreciated it, sure. But her wealth wasn't in compliments. It was in how she felt in her skin, her spirit, her path. After brunch, she and Jackie walked along Military Park, bundled in scarves and laughter. "You know what's wild?" Jackie said, sipping her tea. "You're glowing like you just found a bag of money." Emily smiled. "I feel richer than I've ever been." "Spiritually? And financially," she added with a wink. "I started a savings account, learning how to grow what I've got." Jackie grinned. "That's real wealth, Em. That's building a life." Back at home, Mark was noticeably unsettled. He watched her more now, asked more questions, made snide comments that felt like fishing lines for attention. "New dress?" he asked one night at dinner. Emily nodded, not offering more. "Going somewhere?" "Somewhere better," he scoffed. "You think all this weight loss and green smoothies makes you better than me?" "No," she said calmly, meeting his eyes. "But I know it makes me better than who I used to be." There was nothing left to argue. Emily was no longer fighting for his approval. She wasn't trying to fix what was broken beyond repair. She was building something new, something grounded in values that honored her dignity. That night, she journaled for over an hour, wrote about freedom, confidence, and how health was never just physical. It was emotional, financial, spiritual. Her last sentence was bold, underlined twice. "My life is mine now, and I won't give it back." By early April, spring had begun to show up in Newark like an old friend, cautiously, but full of promise. Cherry blossoms lined the streets, and front lawns were scattered with bright tulips and daffodils. The air had changed, and so had Emily Dawson. She had now dropped a total of 72 pounds, weighing 226 pounds. But more than the number, it was the way she moved. Lighter on her feet, firmer in her words, clearer in her vision. That morning, Emily stood in front of her bedroom mirror. The dress she wore was pale blue, flowy, cinched at the waist. It had been years since she'd worn something that made her feel feminine without needing to hide behind layers. She was getting ready for her first speaking engagement, a panel at a Newark women's event focused on resilience and financial independence. Denise had recommended her. "You've lived the lesson," she had said. "Now it's time to pass it on." At the event, held inside the Newark Public Library's historic auditorium, rows of women sat with notebooks and hopeful eyes. Emily stepped up to the mic. Her hands trembled at first, but once she looked out into the sea of women, some tired, some broken, some just starting their own fight, she spoke from the fire that had carried her. "I spent years thinking I had to earn love by shrinking myself," she said. "But real love, love for yourself, grows when you honor your values, protect your peace, and choose prosperity in every sense of the word. Not just money. I'm talking about spiritual wealth, health, confidence, purpose." After the panel, a young woman approached her in tears. "I saw myself in you," she said. "Your story, it's what I needed." Emily hugged her. No words needed. When she got home that night, around 7:30, Mark was in the living room. For once, he wasn't on his phone. He looked up as she walked in, eyes lingering. "You're late." "I was speaking at a women's event," she said, setting her bag down. "About healing, about building a life after being torn down." He leaned back on the couch, arms crossed. "I heard you've been going around telling people I mistreated you." Emily turned to face him. "Have I said anything that isn't true?" He didn't answer. "You humiliated me, Mark. You replaced me, not just in a job, but in this house, in this marriage. You broke your vows. You broke my spirit." He scoffed. "You weren't exactly easy to be married to, Emily. You let yourself go. You stopped being inspiring." Emily walked closer, her voice calm but sharp. "And now? Am I inspiring enough for you?" He stood, suddenly defensive. "You think this glow-up means you're better than me?" "No," she said, "but I know I'm finally better to me." For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of her, fear of losing control. Later that night, as she packed a second bag, Mark sat on the edge of the bed, quiet. "You're really going?" Emily zipped up her suitcase. "I should have gone months ago, but I needed to remember who I was first." "Is there someone else?" She looked at him. "There is. Me." She moved into a small apartment 2 blocks from the community center. Nothing fancy. 1 bedroom, 2nd floor, creaky floors. But it was hers. It smelled like fresh paint and fresh starts. She bought a small dining table with her own money, set up a tiny workspace by the window, and started sketching out her own wellness coaching business. Jackie helped her file the paperwork. Denise connected her with local resources for women entrepreneurs. Emily called it Rise with Emily, a program that offered affordable coaching for women wanting to reclaim their health, values, and long-term wealth. By the end of April, she had her first 3 paying clients. The day she deposited that check into her business account, she cried in the car. Not because of the dollars, but because it meant freedom. She texted Jackie later that night. "This is what prosperity feels like. It doesn't come fast. It comes with scars and stories, but it's real." And it was just the beginning. By the 2nd week of May, Newark felt like it had woken up from a long sleep. Trees were full again, the air warm and sweet, and people walked slower, soaking in the sun like they hadn't seen it in years. But no one was shining brighter than Emily Dawson. She now weighed 198 pounds. That meant she had lost exactly 100 pounds. But what she had gained couldn't be measured on a scale. It was something deeper, stronger, permanent. One Thursday morning, around 8:15, Emily sat in her tiny new kitchen with a fresh cup of green tea, a blueberry protein muffin, and her laptop. Her coaching business, Rise with Emily, had reached 20 clients. She was fully booked for the month, and all of it was word of mouth. Women were reaching out from all over Jersey. Single moms, nurses, teachers, women going through divorce or burnout. They came looking for support. But they stayed because Emily gave them something rare: honesty, hope, and the proof that prosperity was possible after pain. That morning, she opened an email from Denise with the subject line, "Big Opportunity." It was an invitation to speak at a state-level women's summit. Not just a panel, the keynote. Emily read the words twice, then again. She would be standing in front of over 500 women, speaking her truth, her story, the one that started with heartbreak and humiliation, but turned into strength and wealth of spirit. She closed her eyes and whispered, "You did this, Em. You built this." 2 weeks later, on May 28th, she arrived at the Hyatt Regency downtown, dressed in a cream suit, heels that made her almost 6 feet tall, and a soft golden necklace Jackie had given her that read, "Values" in cursive. It rested right above her collarbone, a reminder. Backstage, she waited for her turn, heart pounding but not with fear, with power. When her name was called, she stepped out into a sea of applause. The lights were bright, the stage wide, but her voice was steady. "I'm not here to sell you a fantasy," she began. "I'm here to remind you that your rock bottom might just be the beginning of your rise." She told them about the dinner, about the betrayal, about the moment Mark handed her job to another woman like it meant nothing. The gasp in the room was collective. She saw eyes well up, heads nod. She continued. "I weighed almost 300 pounds when I realized I wasn't just heavy, I was invisible, and not just to him, but to myself. I didn't lose 100 pounds to get revenge. I lost them to find my way back to my health, my purpose, my power." Then she paused. "Some people think wealth is just about money, but I've learned it's about peace. It's about knowing you're living by your own values. And yes, I started earning again, on my own terms, and I built something out of my own pain. That's real richness." The standing ovation lasted nearly a full minute. After the speech, dozens of women came up to her. One older woman held her hand and whispered, "You said what I never had the courage to say." That night, back at her apartment, Emily sat alone in silence, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights blink outside her window. Then, a knock. She opened the door to find Mark, hair messy, shirt untucked, eyes tired. "I saw your video," he said. "The speech. It's everywhere. Someone shared it at work." Emily said nothing. "I didn't know you had all that in you." "You didn't want to know," she replied. He looked down. "I've been thinking a lot. I made a mistake, Emily. You didn't deserve how I treated you. I was cruel." She nodded slowly. "Yes, you were." A pause. "Can we talk?" "We are talking," she said. "But this is not about what you want, not anymore." He looked up, hopeful. "So, what is this?" She met his gaze, clear and calm. "This is closure." And then, gently but firmly, she closed the door. Inside, her heart beat fast. Not because she was shaken, but because she finally knew her worth. She whispered to herself, "I didn't come this far to look back." And she meant it. It was the second Sunday of June, just past 6 o'clock in the evening. Newark was golden under the summer sun, the sidewalks buzzing with life. Birds chirped, windows were open, and grills were firing up all over the neighborhood. But for Emily Dawson, this Sunday felt different. She was standing at the edge of a stage in Branch Brook Park, dressed in a fitted emerald green dress that flowed as the wind passed through it. Her waist was defined, her smile wide, and her presence undeniable. She weighed 170 pounds now, a total loss of 128 pounds. But again, it wasn't about the number. It was about the woman she had become in the process. The woman who had been broken in front of a crowd and now stood powerful in front of a bigger one. The city of Newark had invited her to headline their annual Rise and Reclaim event, a day dedicated to wellness, resilience, and community leadership. She was no longer just a speaker. She was a symbol, a story, a reflection of prosperity born from pain. As the crowd clapped, Emily stepped up to the microphone. Jackie, Denise, and her clients stood near the front. Even her mother, who had flown in from Florida, sat in the second row with tears already gathering. 3 years ago, Emily began, voice steady, I was sitting at a company dinner where my husband, now ex-husband, stood in front of a crowd and offered my job to another woman. I was 298 pounds, broke, humiliated, and drowning in silence. The crowd grew still. You could hear a pin drop. That night, I promised myself I would never beg for love again. I wouldn't let someone else decide my worth. I started walking, then working out, then rebuilding. And every single pound I dropped, I also dropped the lies I'd been told about myself. She paused and looked across the park, breathing in the moment. Prosperity isn't about being perfect. It's about choosing yourself over and over, even when nobody else does. It's about building real wealth in your heart, in your health, in your home. And it's about walking away from people who confuse control with love. Applause erupted. But Emily wasn't finished. Let me be clear, she said. My revenge wasn't becoming thin. My revenge was becoming whole. At the back of the crowd, just outside the main gathering, stood Mark, alone, hands in his pockets. He looked smaller now, not physically but spiritually, like a man watching a house he burned down rise again without him. After the speech, Emily mingled, hugged strangers who felt like sisters, signed a few copies of the wellness guide she had just published, and took photos with teens who said she made them believe in second chances. Later that night, just before sunset, Mark approached her as she was packing up her table. I saw your speech, he said, voice low. She didn't flinch. I saw you standing, there. I had no idea you'd become all this. Emily closed her binder and looked him in the eyes. That's the thing about people like you. You never see a woman's value until you can't touch it anymore. He swallowed hard. I lost something good. No, Mark, she said gently. You gave it away. He looked like he wanted to say more. Maybe apologize again. Maybe beg. But Emily turned away, not with malice, with peace. As she loaded her car and drove off into the pink and orange horizon, she turned on the radio and rolled the windows down. Her body felt light, her heart full, and her future wide open. Emily Dawson wasn't just transformed, she was vindicated. And this time, the whole world saw it. And you listening to this, have you ever been counted out before rising again? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story.